left field watching the kids. What are you What are you doing out here? He came out there to smoke. I said, heated seats.
Yeah.
Well, open the door.
I can watch them pick dandelions from out here.
Stack dirt clods.
That's how you know where the kids stand, because there's no dandelions for 6 feet in either direction.
It is, that is the truth. How you doing, Mr. Jensen?
Sweet, Dave. How you doing?
Good.
We expecting Commissioner Zerts this evening.
I got a little mic. I was trying to watch the last city council meeting on tape and could not hear the mayor
At all?
at all. I could hear other council members, but couldn't hear the mayor. Of course, and it's on tape. It's not like I can come down here and say, hey, but
Is it, were you watching the Zoom or the
I was watching the YouTube.
YouTube?
Yeah.
The
Because if I was watching the Zoom, I'd have been able to come down here and say, hey. But
Well, and the Zoom is much better quality.
then you can't watch it again.
I think there's a link to it somewhere.
Oh, because the city website gives me a link to the YouTube.
Oh, then what was the Zoom?
Let's bring that up and talk to Brenda.
The
Or
Zoom, does Zoom go to YouTube? Is that
Amanda.
where
I don't
we're
think it
pulling
does.
from for YouTube?
I don't know.
Um,
I don't know. All I know is it's on the line.
messing with my Zoom. Alright, put it on YouTube.
Let's see. Answer question.
Post it.
I thought it was
Your
the other way
investigator
around.
was
Start some stuff.
David,
I can't hear
Yes.
it.
they do have a permit, that's the cigar, tobacco shop that's going in there.
Really?
Yeah, so they have all.
So is that a humidor, that corner with all that
I took a
insulation?
picture, cause I was like, what in
Yeah.
the world?
No,
So,
we need to we need to talk to them about getting something up there.
Did you see that,
Yes.
that installation?
Where is it?
It's been like that forever.
Over there, like in between Verizon and Walmart. I went to the Verizon store today, and the new building has one corner. And I took a picture of it like 3 weeks ago, and the windows were sweating
Oh.
inside there. So,
It's, it's been like that for like 2 years now, and they had their license, they've had their building permits for like 2 years, but they
Whoa.
could never get their act together to do their mechanical air ventilation system until like 6 months ago.
Rare way to do that,
I
but
did.
And the owner is frustrated because he's been trying to get them to end their lease so he could rent it to somebody who's gonna use it, but they've been paying their rent for like 2 years now.
been paying their rent and not tearing up the parking lot. That's,
Yeah. Spoken
if
like
I
a good-
just thought, it really looked odd. I saw it 3 weeks ago or so, and I thought, boy, that looks odd.
alright. They ready to get this show on the road?
Just turn
Let's see.
the audio,
Turn
just
on,
unmute it.
audio on. Suppose I can turn the video on. I don't even want to, but. Record. Plug to this computer. We plugged in.
Make sure your mic is on.
Okay. Alright. Call this public meeting of the Woodland Planning Commission to order at 7:04 PM on Thursday, May 15th, 2025. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the city council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearing examiner, or a court. Unless something gets real weird, I don't think we're gonna do that tonight. Loretta, would you call roll?
Yep. Commissioner Jensen,
I am here.
Commissioner Mattson,
Present.
Commissioner Watt,
Present.
Commissioner Simpson,
Present.
All right. Next up on the agenda is citizen communications for items that are not on the agenda. I don't see anyone online, and I do see someone here in the room with us. No? All right. Well, you can change your mind. Next up then is agenda approval.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
I
Second.
second. Dave seconds.
Okay, double seconds. Any discussion on that? No. Anyone opposed to approving the agenda as written? Motion carries. Great work. Next up, on our consent items, we have approving the minutes of the April 17th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes of the April 17th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve minutes. Any discussion of that? Okay. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes of April 17th meeting as written? Motion carries. Great job. All right.
All the hard work's done.
That's right. Now, moving into the heart of this, our discussion workshop. First up, we have discussion of our 2024-25 comp plan update, transportation discussion. All right. We got a staff presentation, perhaps? Or
Yep.
just moving right into discussion? Yeah, okay.
So for the record, my name is Travis Goddard, Community Development Director for the City of Woodland. And with me is the Code Enforcement Officer, Permit Technician Bretta Butler. So, thank you. So tonight I'm going to focus on the transportation chapter, which is the long-awaited chapter that we've been missing. So I'm going to go over this with some detail simply because it is kind of the last one to arrive. It is a significant number of pages, and it is probably the one section of the comprehensive plan that was completely rewritten. And it was rewritten by SCJ Alliance, who has a long history of transportation studies and exchanging modeling information in the city. So I've read it twice now, and I'm very happy with the information that's in there. So I want to cover that just so you have a good base of where we're starting with. So these are the sections that are in Chapter 6 for the transportation, numbered, and we'll be going through these hopefully relatively quickly for some of them and into some detail so you have a good background of where it's coming from. And then I thought maybe after this, if you wanted to go through the goals and policies, I cut those out and printed them for you. So if you want to spend an extra hour or 3 in here, we can go over those, or you can take them home with you and get back to me. But section 6.1 and 6.2 are basically the purpose and the structure of the element. There's not a lot of meat and potatoes there, just descriptive information. So we'll move on to 6.3, which is the regulatory context, and it talks about how it's consistent with the Growth Management Act, which require consistent with other things. And so it talks about how it's consistent, transportation analysis consistent with our land use assumptions that are in the comprehensive plan and the wrestles that we have with that. And this chapter does address that. Inventory of existing facilities and services. It gauges the performance of our existing infrastructure. It also does traffic forecasting, which is really nice. You don't see that in a lot of comprehensive plans, so this one's really good. It identifies improvements, both our current and future needs. It talks about ADA compatibility, and that's a bonus. Realistic financing plan balanced with planning growth, and intergovernmental coordination and regional consistency, which is an important part of GMA. And then lastly, some demand management strategies. So it's all covered in the chapter. So let's dive in. So it talks about our level of service standards, or LOS standards, and specifically it lays out what our specific level of service standards are, and that is it's C or better for the desired standard on the I-5 main line, which is mostly informational because we really have no control over that. Level of service D or better for arterial state highways, major arterials, and minor arterials. And then it talks about acceptable levels of traffic on collector roads and local streets, which are governed by our design standards as opposed to a level of service. So I think it's important to recognize that this comprehensive plan does specifically state what our desired goals are. And so let's talk about level of service real quick. I've downloaded this offline. I did not create this. I shamelessly stole it from somebody on the web, and I appreciate who it was. I just don't remember who it was off the top of my head. And so you see basically it's kind of a pyramid of level of service standards. And so A is essentially, you see in that picture on the top right, it's no congestion. It's free flow with low traffic volumes and high speeds. And then level of service B is no delays, meaning there's no congestion, reasonably free flow, but speed depends on the traffic flow. So you see in the picture to the right that there's a little more cars on the road. C is minimal delays, and that is moderate congestion. There's an unstable flow, and restricted drivers determine the speed for that type of configuration. If they're camping in the left lane, you tend to bunch up behind them until they get the hint and move over, and that's kind of where it is. And then D is minimal delays, meaning that there is moderate congestion. It is unstable flow, and restricted drivers pick the chosen speed again. And then E is minimal delays, severe congestion, very unstable flow, possible short stoppages. And then F is clearly significant delays, extreme congestion, unacceptable congestion in a lot of ways, and stop and go traffic, which forces the flow on the road. So you can see kind of those pictures. There's kind of different traffic patterns that are suggested by that. And level of service technically is measured in seconds of delay, or time, how long the average driver is delayed throughout the day. So that gives you a little kind of visual of what we talk about when we're talking about level of service. So as I said, the goals and policies, I printed those for you, so we'll go over those last if you want to engage in that tonight. So section 6.5 is the roadway system plan, and you see on the right that there is a map of basically our road responsibilities, whether that's interstate, state, or local, and then of course county in addition to that. And I really like the example that they use there, and that kind of gives you an idea of a hierarchy of arterials, collectors, and locals. The primary purpose of an arterial is for mobility and a little bit of access. Collectors are mobility, but also they balance access. And locals are every driveway on the street accesses a property, but there's really not a lot of mobility up and down the block because that's not the purpose of a local access street. So I really like that visual, so I included it here for you. There's also a figure in there about the functional classifications, and they, of course, for Woodland are from the interstate, minor arterial, major collector, minor collector, city road, down to county road. So those are all described in the chapter of the comprehensive plan. Then it also talks about how many trips per day the capacity is kind of designed for. So for minor arterials, up to 10,000 vehicles, or I'm sorry, really that should be 10,000 or more per day. I apologize, that slide is wrong. And generally they're 35 plus miles per hour. A major collector handles or is designed for 5 to 10,000 trips per day, vehicle trips per day, and that's generally those are designated between 25 and 35 miles per hour within the city. Minor collectors are 1,500 to 5,000 trips a day, 25 miles per hour, and then the local access roads are less than 1,500, and generally they're 25 miles per hour by code. And then there's county roads, which again, I should have QA'd this better. So the county roads should not have a number there because they use a different rating scale, and so that really shouldn't be there. Apologize for that. The design standards, table 1 talks about the specific design speed for each designation and required sidewalk standards. The sidewalk width is all 6 feet because it's got to be ADA if it gets installed. Bicycle lanes and where they're required, and the bicycle lane width, on-street parking and when it's allowed, and then our design maximum average daily trips for those designs. So I point out that in the previous, or a couple slides before, I had mentioned that the local street doesn't have a capacity because it is dictated by this. Access management. So reducing the number of driveways, providing adequate space between driveways. It discusses the minimum spacing and for traffic signals and intersections, managing turning movements, and managing the highway median. So that's all covered in the chapter. If you're interested and have a analytical mind or a wonkish policy mind, really interesting information in there. And I pulled out table 2, which is really the highways, because those aren't normally what you would think about, but we have information about the classes of highways in the community, their posted speed limits, and kind of their private connection spacing. So a lot of good information about access management in this chapter. We have a section on traffic volumes and operations. So table 3 includes the 2024 PM peak hour traffic data for locations throughout Woodland. So this is not normal in a comprehensive plan. So this is kind of a Cadillac chapter for the comprehensive plan. Because in addition to the 2024, because the traffic engineer who wrote this chapter for the consultant, they do so much work in Woodland that they felt they were confident that they could provide us 2045 PM peak hour projections. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have a lot of good data from the industrial traffic study, which looked at exit 22. And then, of course, we have recent exit 21 data and modeling, along with all of the modeling that's been done for the new subdivisions along 503. So we really had a lot of good information for them to base it on. And so that is also in chapter 3. And I'd like to point out that they use the existing land use presumptions in the comprehensive plan. And knowing that we have a problem with our housing chapter and our housing projections because of how much land we have left in the city, and we need to talk about how much housing is going to be dedicated to us by Cowlitz County, and they're going to need to talk urban growth area expansion next year. It's kind of that black box that we don't know what to do with. The good news is when we did the Exit 21 study, I had the foresight to recognize that we are going to be wrestling with this problem in 2025, and this was back in 2022. I said, okay, add 1,000 here and add 1,000 houses here and add some houses here. So we've already projected housing in the bottoms and up the river, and so lo and behold, here we are facing the 2026 and Cowlitz County handing down potentially 2,200 extra housing units. And our Exit 21 study considered an extra 2,100 housing units. So actually we're pretty lucky because the data we have reflects where we plan to be, even though we're kind of fighting with one arm tied behind our back. So that has been factored into the traffic data. So very happy about that. They did a good job. And we'll get into some of that data if you want to as we go through there. So traffic volumes and operations. So they also included in that table, they do calculations about volume of the road, or volume of traffic versus the capacity of the road. And in the table, you'll see numbers that vary from 0.23 to 1.2, I think. And if the number is less than 1, it means we have more capacity than the cars that we expect to be on the road. So they will function into the future without reaching that kind of capacity. If it's over 1, that indicates that that stretch of road or that intersection will be over capacity. There's more cars going through it than the actual design capacity. So that's how they help decide and identify what projects need to be on and how we can prioritize getting funding for those based upon that number right there. And so they did that balance for both 2024 and 2045, or sorry, 2024 and 2045. So you can see the current score and the projected score, which is really good because people are dying for that information, and I'm really happy that they laid it out very clearly. And essentially what they determined is there's some key intersections which are really important. Obviously exit 21, exit 22, and then 503 and Millard, and Gorig Street, Lakeshore, Buckeye. Now I point those out, so I threw some visuals in here because it should reinforce the idea that the city is starting to take care of things and we are paying attention to what's going to happen. We're planning ahead. And the reason why I point that out is the next slide. So for those of you who are not that familiar, Millard is just north of exit 21 on the other side of the AM/PM. It goes down to the Mexican restaurant and the Woodland Shores RV park. That's Millard, and across the street I think is the letterbox. That's Millard intersection. And then exit 21, on and off ramps, everybody knows those. And then the fourth intersection of concern is right by the library, the park and ride, and the civic center, which is just south, the first intersection on the west side of exit 21. And I point that out because of the 3 of the 4 biggest potential areas of concern are all on our radar to be fixed with the exit 21 review. So in this case, the Lakeshore, Gorig, Buckeye intersection is the bottom, or the left hand, in the bottom left hand corner, that roundabout. And then the Millard, which is just north and east of the big roundabout, that is just outside of the exit 21 project site, but that intersection will be greatly relieved by reducing the stop and go traffic on Lewis River Road. So in effect, it will be fixed when exit 21 is built without any work on that intersection. And then of course the backup plan is the 4 intersection, and Buckeye Lakeshore is just off the picture here, but it's, if we go with the lights, it will have a traffic light. Then we have the 2 exit 21 traffic lights, and then Millard would be the 4th location of the northmost. So of the identified problems between now and 2045, 3 of those will be addressed when we fix exit 21. So if we fix that and we don't have those problems through 2045, that's 20 years theoretically problem-free driving. So you should be able to accommodate our growth without exacerbating the problem that we currently are dealing with. So I was very happy to see that information in the plan.
While you're there, can you go back
Sure.
to the roundabout?
Yep.
And do the roundabouts with existing overpass, or is that a new overpass?
Yes, so one of the great aspects of both of these designs is they are looking at removing the sidewalks and putting them up on the outside of the pillars. So we are 4 or 5 feet above the road, but we get like an extra 12 feet of pavement without having to actually do any structural improvements. So you end up with a whole extra lane just simply by moving the sidewalks. And so
Okay.
you eliminate the nested turn lanes and you get independent turn lanes, and the possibilities are considerably better just by doing that.
That's kind of what I was looking at, was bike lanes.
Oh.
And
And,
I guess you would get off your bike and go down the sidewalk.
well, and they're going to have to consider that as part of the review. And part of that is because what we'll get to later, because there is a multimodal responsibility that comes with all of these project designs, and you have to do complete street designs if you're going to use state and federal money. So it is going to be incorporated into that.
So that, I mean, I don't know that that drawing gives us, realistic detail, but that, that's only showing 4 lanes under there, which isn't any more lanes than.
Preliminary. Yep. So this is the preliminary design. Okay, any other comments before I move on? Okay, so the next section in the comprehensive plan talks about roadway safety, and it analyzes our existing crash data. And so this is interesting as well because it talks about the individual crash rates and does that analysis. And it includes crash injury distribution. The only fatalities we've had are on I-5. And so they are within the city limits, but they're technically not on city roads. And so it's kind of an interesting discussion, but it analyzes the safety of our roads and points to the goals and policies which encourage that integrated multimodal human-powered transportation network that is encouraged. And intersection-related crashes, there's maps on that as well. And it talks about the contributing factors. Now, interestingly, what it says is that Woodland is considerably better on the safety side than much of our region, but it still identifies that, the contributing factors to the accidents we do have are travel speed, distracted and impaired driving, the turning movements, the design of turning movements, and visibility and sight distance limitations. Those are the things we still can work on. And then we also have lower than regional averages for pedestrian and bicycle involved crashes in the area of which is an area of concern considered in our safety plans for both the regional and the Council of Government Safety Plan and our regional TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee of Cowlitz County. And so, and the primary contributors to pedestrian and bicycle accidents tend to be drivers not granting right-of-way pedestrians and bicycles, and limited visibility of pedestrians and bicycles at turns and curves. So those are the things that we can work on, even though we are not particularly the outstanding bad examples that people look at. So even though we have a good track record, there's always more we can do, and the comp plan reflects that desire.
Well, and there are a lot of reasons we could have low crashes in that realm, right? Could be because we don't have anybody on bikes around the floor.
Yes.
And that's not something to
Yes.
toot our horns about.
Yeah. Well, and I point out that I specifically kept going because I knew you would point that out, because part of what it talks about is our existing deficiencies are limited connectivity east-west due to I-5, railroad, Lewis River, the topography north of town. And a lot of those include expensive solutions which require regional cooperation. And actually, this is the part that I think you will want to take a look at and make sure that it's consistent, because it's the active transportation part of the plan. And when they say active, they're really talking about human-powered transportation systems, whether that's walking, biking, wheelchair or other mobility aids like walkers and other wheeled vehicles, skateboards and scooters, that we build that into our transportation system. And it points out that we have a complete streets section that was adopted within the last couple of years, and it includes language, and it defines that the street that is designed to be safe and accessible for all. That's drivers, bicyclists, transit riders and vehicles, freight vehicles, emergency service providers, and pedestrians of all ages and abilities. So that is in the code, and that didn't exist when we last updated our comprehensive plan. So this chapter recognizes that those are recognized responsibilities that have been adopted in code. And then it identifies the destinations that we should be considering, and that is schools, transit stops, parks, commercial nodes, and it looks for gaps in the system, and it looks for connection opportunities as part of this chapter. So this is really a lot of good policy that was not in our plan previously. So 6.7 is the transportation, public transportation and demand management. This was interesting because I did not even realize as the city planner that all of these services were available. I knew about LCAP, which is the Lower Columbia Community Action Program. They have a bus stop by the Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center, and they do a fixed route that goes around Clark to Cowlitz, and with a stop in Woodland, and they do limited service. But also,
Excuse me, how current is the information about CAP? Because, I mean, I kind of remember reading in the Daily News fairly, I don't know, a month or so ago, that there's something happening with their transportation?
oh, that is a good question. As far as I know, they were using the most up-to-date information they could find.
And when was that? I mean, up to date when?
Well, this came to us like a little more than a week ago.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I truly don't know for sure what the situation is now, but there was something about it.
yeah.
So, I believe that they're trying to contract out that work. That might have been what you're, I'll Google it while we're doing this, but, I don't think it's stopped. I don't think they're planning on stopping. I think they're looking for a different provider to be able to provide better service.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've ridden that bus a lot, and it's not great.
Okay.
Not because the folks driving aren't doing a good job, just because it's a van-based route, and it's really uncomfortable on the highway. It's fine on local streets, but it's just loud and
Yeah.
unpleasant.
And these other ones that are on this list, Catholic Community Services, Disabled American Veterans, the Cowlitz Tribe Transit Service, those are, I forget the term that they use, but those are all kind of on-demand type services, and if you qualify for them, they will pick you up, but they may only come through town once a day, and they offer certain rides to certain users. And Reserve a Ride Transportation was on that list as well, so I was not even aware of these bottom four were available, but they seem to understand what's available because they do so much transportation work in the area. So, and then of course they point out the Park and Ride facility, which is 84 spaces, and it is a de facto transit hub because virtually all of those services have pickup at the Park and Ride. So they do a good job at recognizing the community resources that are applicable at this point. And then they also have a section on aviation, rail, and marine. We won't go through those, but it does a discussion of the airport, the railroad, and the port facilities out in the bottom. So specifically Martins Bar and Austin Point kind of identified and discussed in that. But since they're not in our jurisdiction, it's more of just an acknowledgement that there is a marine aspect to transportation in the bottoms.
Was it in the engineer's street crossing in Woodland?
So it is not, and I was having that thought today when I was writing notes at my desk. The port specifically is seeking funding to do railroad crossings or to address the railroad issues, and they're actually looking at doing underpasses. So Davidson, Wayland, and Scott Avenue, instead of going over, they would dive under the railroad tracks at all three of those, so those would become non-stop or no crossing, at-grade crossing intersections. So instead of closing, they're looking for an alternate way to create that east-west connector without the,
And then that would have to have our mobility standards.
yep, yep.
Three different areas where they would excavate an underpass, huh?
Dive under the tracks, yep.
Isn't it, I mean, that seems like
Seems
that would,
like a lot.
it seems like a lot. It also seems like, I mean, that just seems like there's some safety issues there for
Yeah.
evacuation.
And the fact that I know that, it's kind of like this insider's information about maybe losing cap. At some point, do you not throw everything on there that you know? Because it may take them 25 years to actually do those
Sure.
crossings, right? Or
I do see a headline that the cap bus is ending in June.
it's what?
Ending in June.
Ending in June.
Oh,
And whether or not that has changed, I don't know.
so we
Yeah,
might
but
have to.
yeah, I do think they're trying to do,
So we might have to
do
do
something
some
about it.
language amendment that simply says that or similar service provided to close that gap. And I may call Bill Fashing at the COG, the Council of Government, and see if what he's heard and who's talking to who about maybe trying to fill that void, because I'm sure somebody is addressing that. So it may just be we might make it a local limited busing heading and say that it's currently filled by the LCAP, and it hopefully will try and replace it.
They might have been depending on federal dollars.
Yeah, which may be gone now but return next month or never return at all, right? So so the aviation, rail, and marine is also in there. So and then chapter 6.9, they kind of leave that blank in that it's language that needs to be developed with Public Works, because all the improvements are outlined in our Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, which is essentially a complete list of identified projects, and it's updated annually. And as we kind of move things from vision to design into a line for funding, then that gets, theoretically, it's a 6-month funding window, but as stuff gets funded by different projects, it might jump ahead in the line or might fall off the list because it doesn't get funding. But it's the city's improvement program that we adopt every year and update every year. Stuff gets done, falls off the list, or gets added to the list. And they're actually, the council is going to be looking at, I think, in the first meeting in June. So if you want to see this year's tip, it's coming up for council pretty quick. And so that is essentially a recap of the transportation section. Do you have any questions? Do you maybe want, I can go over a little bit of table 3 if you want to take a look at that table that I'm so jazzed about. It's the 2024-2045 chapter.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that, I have some, well, it is jumping into that. Just like, kind of a, something, maybe this is just my ignorance, but this does look like great information. And we've talked about my opinions on level of service before. But these are both about, it's about PM peak hour, right? And so it sounds like we're sort of, I guess what I'm trying to get at very clumsily is, like, should 1 hour of the day be controlling? And that I'm asking the question, may suggest that I don't believe it should be, but, I think that's something to think about.
Yes,
Especially, when you talked about, one of your headings was expensive solutions.
and that is a good point, because engineers really historically have thought about PM peak hours, but they have started to move away from that, and in fact, our traffic impact fees, or transportation impact fees, our TIF, is actually based on peak vehicle hour. It is no longer based on PM peak hour, because there are uses that generate trips that are not in the PM peak hour, and we've been kind of missing that fact. And kind of the new standard that's going around, and that is you look at the worst hour of the day, and generally for individual uses we analyze that, but generally the worst hour of the day, when you pool all the trips together, is the PM peak hour. So they chose to look at the PM peak hour, even though our impact fees are based on peak vehicle hour.
So I guess I would apply the same argument to, regardless of when that worst hour is. It's just because, if you have one bad hour and the rest of the day it's fine, I don't think it's an efficient use of resources or a responsible use of resources to make sure that one peak hour is free flowing if the road's empty the rest of the day. Because, there's plenty of room for just behavior adjustment to solve 1 hour. Now, if it's the peak 3 hours, I think that's a different story. But yeah, 1 hour, it seems like not everybody, but enough people can fudge their trip 15 minutes one way or the other
Yes.
to mitigate that.
Right,
Yep.
I try not to go across town at certain times of day, yeah.
Well, and that's especially true for exit 22, right? Because everybody on Sherman Way, they have their shift work so that everybody gets out at 3:30 or 4, and it's worse at 3:30 and 4 than it is at 5 or 6.
But it's bad for business as well, because I typically leave for Portland about 3:45, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if I need gas, I'm not getting it in Woodland. I'm not getting off and going on Pacific and going to Safeway or anything else. So that business is just leaving Woodland. And now with all of the traffic apps and everything, you're able to look ahead and see that there's a 3/4 of a mile backup on Pacific, and not stop there, go on down the road to La Center or whatever. So from the business aspect, it is, even at peak hour, that's when somebody's gonna go spend some money or not, and they're not gonna do it when that traffic's backed up. And Sherman Way's a different story, because there's not really any place for a person to stop and spend their money other than that AM and PM that's there now. But at exit 21, it is, I think about it, I think, well, not stopping as much as I like to shop local, not stopping in Woodland, and it's too unpredictable as how long it's gonna take you to get back on the freeway there,
Yeah.
Travis, I'm trying to wrap my head around having some uses not using PM peak hours, because that's not their highest traffic generation time, right? And it's interesting thought that you're not counting them all at the same time, but I wonder, how do you synthesize that? Like a school, for example, is going to be maybe in the morning, right?
Or a daycare.
Right.
Yep.
And then your PM peak hours is like you're talking about down by Walmart, where it backs up by 8 PM and stuff. How do you if you're using different times? How do you? I'm sure there's a way. I'm just not wrapping my head around how that can be done
Yeah.
without using one general.
As a planner, that I have wrestle with that same problem, and I am assured by the traffic engineers, and it's probably because they're using 500,000 worth of cell phone data that's been collected by some company that gets paid to analyze those numbers, and they can get down to the level of detail of this property. You can run a report for this property, and it'll tell you for the last 12 months trip date and time, and synthesize all of that
feed
data.
it all into a clock, I guess, like
Yeah.
a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as difficult as I'm trying to make it out to
And
be.
the actual interchange or intersection or whatever, you know, they put the cameras up now on posts and they're motion sensing and they can count, they can tell between a car and a pedestrian and a dog, you know, and they count them all up and graph that data based on what time of day they took the pictures, you know.
I also really liked what Tell said in terms of, you know, ineffective use of resources, throwing all the resources at something that can simply be behavior modification.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good point.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
I sort of thought it was too.
Tell and I've had those discussions.
For what, 12 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. This is interesting. I'll you know, not to beat this into the ground, but you know, they've done some cool work here. I think, you know, a lot of these numbers can vary dramatically just based on minor changes to assumptions going into them. You know, and that could be, so like the volumes they're choosing here, and I don't know their methodology, but I assume they're not taking into account sort of the constraining impact of the capacity, right? Because at some point, if the trip becomes miserable enough, people aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's, so it's, you know, there's only so bad that the level of service can actually get. And, you know, and again, like, if it's an F or like a really bad F for 30 minutes a day,
Yes.
I have
And-
no problem with that.
And for some people, the C might as well be an F because
Yeah.
they want what they want right now
Yeah, and-
without that 8-second delay
Well, and they have no clue what it costs to build
to,
infrastructure.
to fix.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So, I have a question. I wasn't able to open this file, so I can't find it out for myself, but the presentation you gave talked about an increase in housing units and planning for an increase in housing units. Does it also plan for all of the industrial and light industrial we have and population?
It does.
If lifestyle things change and people start living 8 to a house
Oh.
instead of 2.3, is
Oh.
this gonna,
It does not. It uses conventional assumptions. Yeah.
but it does, I mean, does it estimate for the industrial area?
It does. Industrial and commercial build out.
And that is, I mean, well, I guess that's east of
Does
our
that
five.
follow the graph of the 2.3%? We're gonna have you know, if we have, there's the same graph for the sewer and the water and the,
Yeah. Well, and you keep pointing out the fundamental flaw with urban planning, and that is you can only predict the future by measuring the past. And that's exactly how the water and sewer is inconsistent because of historical growth. And we could end up with the Coca-Cola bottling company that doubles our water use and is totally, they'd have to build all the infrastructure themselves. And yeah, that's not factored into it. We just assume that the next 50 acres of industrial development is going to be like the last 50 acres of industrial development, and it's going to use the same amount of water for restroom because they're out there hammering rocks or cutting iron just like USNR is, or somebody, you know, the truss plant is assembling house trusses. Yeah, they have a couple restrooms and they're not using water, whereas the high school, you build the rest of the high school, it's going to significantly increase the water, and there's zero population growth associated with it. And that's kind of why we have to balance that. Live with the 2.3 water and sewer plan, but the plan for the
so
2.7
where's our
population.
traffic, does our traffic have a multiplier like that?
So it essentially looks at the 700 units in our housing capacity that we have in the city, and it includes an assumption that there's going to be 2,000, I can't remember whether it's 2,000 or 2,500 additional housing units using our roads that funnel through exit 21 and exit 22. So really it's exit 21, I think is the projection data. Whereas exit 22, the majority of that study was assuming that all the industrial traffic is going to either come or go. A significant capacity of that will go through exit 22. And kind of what we're looking at here reflects that in that, for example, dike access east of I-5, which is exit 22, the east leg, current capacity is 846, 2045 capacity is 846, and our current volume is 585. But if the industrial district fills out, it's going to jump to 1,070 p.m. peak hour trips. So it's going to go from level of service B, because it's only at 69% capacity. It will be at 126% capacity, essentially, is what that's saying.
Where are all those folks going eastbound from I-5?
Failing. Sorry?
Where are all those people? Where are they projecting those?
Well, right
people
now they're going to Sherman Way and Walmart.
That would be westbound.
Yeah, that's also west of I-5.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm looking at the wrong side. So yeah, so this is theoretically heading towards Green Mountain Road and Lewis River Road, avoiding exit 21, so they cross by the cemetery and enter the roundabout and head up river or into the neighborhoods of.
Just why?
The
Like, why so
roundabouts,
many though?
so the roundabouts handle eastbound and westbound. If you're getting off the roundabout to go west, you go east and then you go west.
So that's
So the capacity at that little piece is the same as the cumulative total of both east and west right there. Then fortunately the east leaves, but you
so,
got to add those two numbers together for a little bit there.
so if you dive into the actual data of the individual studies, they actually do map and model the. You enter on one side and X goes north onto the I-5 northbound ramp. X amount go underneath and into underneath the railroad tracks and over to the Walmart area. So they have a distribution. Once they go under the train tracks, there's a distribution that goes straight and up into Walmart, a distribution that goes straight and down Sherman, straight and past your business, and then there's also a function that gets distributed. They go around 3/4 and head on to I-5 heading south. So that detail is in the individual studies, and this is just kind of a synopsis of all of those movements. But there is underlying studies, and you could call the office and see all of those because we get them for a lot of the individual projects.
I just understand that at either off-ramp, which those are looking at either off-ramp, when you're waiting on the off-ramp, it doesn't matter if you're eastbound or westbound, you're waiting on the off-ramp because all of that is together. So
Yes.
that level of service is.
But this is level of service for Dike Access Road. It's not even for I-5. So it's not talking about the off-ramps. This is just talking about once you get to Dike Access. So once you're off the highway.
I would assume that's what.
Although the chapter does talk about and it does identify ways and the fixes, the improvements. So for example, if you double the number of lanes on the off-ramp, you can do twice as much stacking. If you double the size of the roundabout, you can carve out those right turns and get them out before they even get to the roundabout. That's the kind of detail that is in the comprehensive plan, which is good, because normally you have to get an individual traffic study to do that, and since those are kind of lying around, the $1 million shelf of plans that nobody looks at, they actually looked at them and tried to incorporate some of that visioning into what we need to plan for in our comprehensive plan.
I believe that. I'm not an anti-roundabout person at all, but they do have their limits because of the fact that really everybody, no matter which direction they're going, is sharing the same road and waiting for each other at some point.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I wonder why eastbound versus westbound there, if it really is two separate numbers or if it's just one number.
I
Would-
think, so the way and I might be missing your initial, I know what you're saying. The stack is the same regardless, is what you're saying. But the roundabout is the intersection per se. When they leave that intersection and leave that roundabout, those are the counts, right?
The worst
So that's
level
what
of
they're
service,
getting at.
though,
But the stack up is still the same. It's still a combined stack,
The-
is what you're saying.
once they've left, they're moving, though. That's
It's like the unofficial 2 lanes that you have on 21. They form 2 lanes. It's not striped for it, but we
Right.
form 2 lanes
Yeah.
because we don't want to sit in one lane.
Yeah.
You can't really do that on a roundabout, I think is what you're getting at.
yes, very much. Well, and I just wonder if that, if they're looking at the cars that are going east and the cars that are going west, like I say, at some point they're waiting on each other, even though they're going opposite directions, and that's what we're going to see. Well, I have a lot of experience at the whole Sherman Way thing there, and actually a lot of the problems with that is that it was not designed to have the amount of cars coming out of Walmart that it has, but all of the high school traffic goes through the Walmart parking lot and then goes and gets priority on the roundabout and slows down everybody else. You know, so
That could have nipped that in the bud by not building a parking lot at the high school.
Right.
or putting a gate on that one
They can ride
entrance
the
to
bus.
Walmart.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But
The other intersection right now that is actually the lowest graded intersection in the community is actually the Buckeye leg of this roundabout or this intersection down here.
Yeah.
And part of that is because it's open to through traffic on Gorig. And the right-hand turn from Lakeshore, it has a high traffic count, and they tend to bully that intersection when there's somebody not going through. The right turn has the next in line, and so if you're trying to turn left on Buckeye, there's never an opportunity.
That's an easy solution. You just go around the block and find a stop sign.
And the school buses have literally learned that you come out, you turn left at Park or one of the other streets and work your way down to get in by US Bank or by the teriyaki shop, and they come and they're part of that straight line without having to stop. But yeah, it literally is, if it's not the Gehrig Street traffic that bullies them, it's the Lakeshore because they're next in line.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the roundabout's a nice solution to that. But if we're worried about people turning left off of Buckeye, which is me, my house is down there. There are ways around that without building any more infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's just,
I don't
and
understand.
people get wise.
And
right?
we're-
You know, the years back, I don't know who all was here, but we had some school students that actually videoed that intersection for a few hours and did their own little traffic study on it. And their takeaway from it was, 'cause they weren't high schoolers, but it was all the high schoolers getting out of school in their cars and blocking up that intersection. But that was before the new high school was
Way
built,
back then.
obviously. And I watched that after 25 years in a truck or whatever I did, and I thought, the problem here is the school buses need to leave 5 minutes apart. they all pull out of there at the same time together, so I agree with you completely, Tell. I think it's a behavioral thing. We used to have Woodland PD go to that intersection and flag it and control
really?
traffic at that intersection when school got out.
Interesting. So, interestingly enough, in a side note, rabbit hole, we are actually looking at the possibility of closing the Buckeye leg of that intersection, making it a three-way intersection. So there
Hope you'll
would
still
be
let us turn
nobody
right on
trying to
Buckeye.
turn left, but they would be forced to go around one block either direction and figure that out. So we are actually looking at that because it would significantly improve current traffic as well as potential roundabout traffic.
Well, let me still turn right onto Buckeye from Gehrig, please.
Yes, you potentially
All right.
could. Yeah.
So you're not gonna like
Yeah.
put a barrier across the road, are you? Not
Well, that's
completely.
part of the discussion because what the designers realized is there is an empty lot on the corner where they put the nativity and the sign for Love's Playhouse. They're actually going to have to purchase a significant amount of that lot, which might make it unbuildable, which means we'd have to buy potentially the whole thing and the value of that. And the question ultimately comes down to if we take a corner off the apartments and a corner off the lot, do we really need that for the amount of traffic that uses that? Because just closing that leg is a massive service improvement for the entire
shift
intersection.
the whole thing east
You're
too.
just playing whack-a-mole though, right?
Shift the whole thing east, and you take a chunk out of the Civic Center's front yard.
Has there been discussion
And that
about,
is planned.
has there been a discussion about no left or right turn off of Buckeye between the hours of 2:30 and 4:30 or something where,
No,
you know,
we haven't talked about that.
um,
Because part of it is it would be such a short-term fix because it's going to be in construction hopefully in a couple years. So
well,
it's
signs are cheap.
It's true.
and
So
it's not,
painting-
but
you
it's
know.
not a problem getting into Buckeye. It's a problem getting out of Buckeye. So
I mean, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's,
Put a sign that says
put-
no left turn.
yeah,
You're golden.
no, yeah, don't have people try to get out of Buckeye between 2:30 and 4:30. And
Make it a right turn only. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah. We also shouldn't let them try to get to Lakeshore.
yeah.
so years back, one of our mayors had he had an idea about in between I don't even know what to call the school anymore, but the grade school and the tracks, there's some frontage there, there's some property there, and that actually goes all the way up to almost into the industrial area, up towards Safeway. And he talked about opening that up, and yes, thank you.
So you're talking of this alignment back here.
Yes.
So we have had that conversation. The problem is the amount of money it would take to build a road that no one would have access to is questionable use of funds. And then the obvious question is, yes, you could get from the residential neighbor up to Scott Avenue, but then all of the industrial trucks on Scott Avenue would be able to go through the residential neighborhood, which would be counterproductive if you're theoretically.
I'm looking at getting the
Yeah.
buses.
Oh.
I'm looking at getting the buses out of town without going through town.
Their bus barn is right there. See their bus
Yep.
barn? That's their
Yep,
bus barn.
that's
I don't
their
know.
bus
Are they
barn.
still using the bus barn?
They absolutely are, yep. And as a
But that's
matter
not
of
where
fact,
they're loading up.
they're gearing up to do a lot of electrical bus fleets and electrical improvements. So
That's
yeah,
gonna
they are
cost our
there.
roads.
They are there to stay.
This thing's gonna weigh 20 tons.
Yep. What's that?
This thing's gonna weigh 20 tons.
Mm.
Gonna be worse than garbage trucks.
As long as they're not Teslas, we won't have to worry about the firebombing of the
Okay.
Chargers. But yes, that in itself is kind of a colossal bad location because it all filters into Buckeye, which is that terrible intersection. They can turn left on Fraser, but terrible 90-degree turns at CC Street or trying to work their
And
way
Is that
north to
is
Washington.
that city property? Is that already right away?
This?
No. In between.
Oh, back here?
Yeah, in
n-
between all the way up to Buckeye.
I don't think it is. I think there is a leg here. and that's Gordon Street, because I know Gordon Street is partially developed up here.
Yeah.
But it is not, I think it only comes down to the the school property, and the school theoretically,
Because that would be at least good for a bike path
yeah,
or something to get
yep.
foot traffic and alternative traffic up.
And you know, that's a good question, because it makes you wonder why the school district doesn't think about trying to construct a back exit that would allow them to move north to CC and Washington Street and come out on Washington Street. Because when you get to Pacific, this is a much better turning movement here, because you're on the other side of Napa and Nameless Auto, than trying to come out at CC, which is around the corner, or trying to come out at Buckeye.
So, you know, they try like the Dickens to not have those buses go over the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
That's why they don't come out of town and go over the tracks and go,
Is that why they don't go Pekin?
yeah. And
I
if,
always wondered why they funnel it to Buckeye instead of just, 'cause it's not that far, take that, you know, jump on that little
Yeah.
truck route and then get on to Pekin.
no, and that's why the high school is where it is. That's why the school didn't get built someplace else and everything else, because it
Was
would
there
have
a
meant,
bus train collision in the past I'm not aware of? Still
I don't
haunts
think, they're
that
just
city.
afraid of it.
I know that parents pick up, and that's how they leave right up past, they cross Bozarth and go right to Davidson and head out to Pekin.
Yeah, and then go to the high school and get the other kids and, yeah, and then tie up Sherman Way and.
I don't know, I used to have to ride the bus a lot, I didn't get picked up every day, I don't know how things
So-
have changed.
And I can tell you, I can tell, because the people at Walt's Meats all wear the hairnets and the bump caps, and I can tell you, they go all the way around and up there to 22 to get on. I'm assuming if they're going north, so that's all. They're going all the way around town to go north to avoid this mess or that mess. I'm in the old city hall. Damn it.
Yeah. Yeah, and ultimately, the city's transportation plan is to have a north-south connector over here that would eventually connect down to Wayland and bring them out south on the other side of Horseshoe Lake, as opposed to bringing it across Davidson and through the downtown. Hopefully, a lot of that industrial traffic will disappear from our surface roads.
Yeah, but it'll all end up at 22 if we don't get a Scott Avenue
Yeah.
interchange. I just want, just question, I just wonder how much of that's been looked at and assessed and.
And I love your statement about how you use your apps and kind of look for that, avoid the backups. I've heard that described as the Bruce Lee explanation of transportation or traffic, and that's be like water. It searches for the least resistance and it knows without being told how to avoid the bad parts. And I think
To a
that,
degree, there's a latency to it. If, I've been pounding I-5 for a long time, and it used to be if I-5 got messed up at the East Fork of the Lewis River or whatever, you could get off and go through the center and come up. But now that everybody has the app, their app tells them to go that way.
yeah,
But you can stay on the freeway and go faster because the accident got cleared, but those people are at the
Stuck.
CC Street Bridge and backed up for
Driving-
3 or 4 miles.
driving through the center for the next half
When-
hour.
When the slide happened in the '96 flood, we were going all the way up to Annie's Berry Farm and over to get back on because all of the stuff down here was so bad. Going all the way around there to get around that. The freeways backed up all the way to Ridgefield every night, Which I like what you said about evacuation routes. I think evacuation routes need to be part of our planning, especially with the highest concern in the surveys was for wildfire. You know, that was the highest rated concern. More people were concerned about fires than anything else.
Which definitely isn't the biggest risk, but like it does. To some degree, it doesn't really matter because the evacuation for a wildfire is going to be different than for a flood. But
Well, we're trusting our dam inspectors.
should be more worried about flood. I'll tell you that much.
I have the privilege of driving sandbag truck on the dike in '96, and we had a bus load of volunteers, and they got out of the bus about a mile from the bad spot and walked out to the bad spot and talked about what they were going to do. Then they had me drive the truck out there, and then they watched me for about 10 minutes to make sure I didn't wash away. And then they came back and we started sandbagging stuff.
And unloaded
So
you.
Woodland appreciates your service, dude.
that's Team Sandbag, Team 96. But we are weak on the evacuation stuff for flood.
Or and realistically at all. For whatever reason we need to evacuate.
Can we go back to that graph?
Which, okay. This one?
That one.
Yep.
So is the transportation, is the tip gonna be in this as any kind of addendum or anything? When the public looks at this, are they gonna see some answers?
And that's why they punted on including language, is after talking to the Public Works Director today, we think what we're gonna include is some language that the improvement program is determined by the tip, and it is done more consistently than the comprehensive plan. So rather than trying to do an outdated list that looks forward, we are going to just clearly reference and adopt it by reference so that every year it's the best data that we have based on the tip, not on the comprehensive plan. It's supported by the goals and policies, but ultimately, based on available funding, it's better to be nimble than it is to be more predictive.
Is it a correct assumption to make on this chart? This is based on the PM peak hour, or PM peak hour. I think I said that right.
Yep.
So there will be a certain inverse relationship, not the same exactly, right? Because PM is always higher than AM, but there'll be an inverse, they'll switch positions.
Yes. And the description of what's going on here is really quite informative, especially like for the average citizen who doesn't deal with this stuff. It's could be fascinating reading or good NyQuil fodder.
Well, I think there's some selection bias for this
Or
crowd, right? Like we're
Deterrent for wanting to discuss transportation.
sure.
Yeah, but just the fact that there's actual numbers that people can read and understand, and what does that VC number stand for? There's an entire paragraph that talks about the relationship between capacity and volume of demand.
That's and that's great. I think there's some risk there because having a number on it makes it look like it's a fact.
Yeah.
And
And
there's
what's
a lot of interpretation and a lot of fudging and a lot of
Yeah.
assumptions that go into that.
and what's not discussed is what's going to happen in 2030, 2035. Exactly what point do these numbers go from, capacity to no capacity, and how are we timing our stuff accordingly? But at some point, you almost have to stop and say, okay, this is a snapshot, and the goal that we're looking at in 40 years is we know that this is on our radar, and we will do our best to predict when needs to be fixed.
Martel, I don't disagree with you that there's some, error, built into that. You're talking about the capacity side. The volume side's actually counted. These are counts.
For 2020,
volume,
for
right?
2024 it is.
Statistical
Oh,
modeling.
okay,
Yeah.
they're not based on a traffic count.
How much of the,
Well, statistical modeling based on our existing
Okay.
count.
how much of
Statistical
that are we
modeling. I got you,
missing?
I got you.
Because I can't see how many more categories, brackets are in the graph there.
Oh, and so these are
Okay,
these
so-
are intersections, and so there's a
Oh,
lot
there's
of
a bunch, okay.
Yep, there's a lot of them.
There's some Fs, all right, because I saw that one section there, and it was like, well, looking at that, it says that we're gonna, every number was below 1, it's like in 20 years, we're gonna be okay, and I thought, but that's,
We still got lots of A's.
but we're already at a F at, does that have the I-5 exit at 21
And
northbound on there?
it's not absolutely clear, but yes. So this is Dike Access and I-5. So really, these top ones are Exit 22, Dike Access, and Sherman. So if you know the town well, you can kind of guess. And there is a map that includes.
Well, I assumed that Dike access east of I-5 was the off-ramp, and
well, there's an eastbound and a westbound. So
that's off the off-ramp.
where
That
the
is the
trips are coming
off-ramp,
from.
so you have an exit 21 east and west.
So this is the leg coming out eastbound. This is
Yeah.
the leg coming out westbound. Yeah.
Which
So-
is Dike Access Road itself. So we're
Exit
talking about level
exit 21. Exit. I'm
Well,
talking. I'm
exit
asking
21,
about.
okay. So then it's Lewis River Road. So we're not
Yeah.
talking about level of service for the off ramp. We're talking about level of service for
On
Lewis
our
River
roads.
Road, and those are going to be much different numbers
Right.
potentially. Maybe not necessarily.
It's
but
not.
potentially.
That's what I'm asking. So I don't have a Windows package on this laptop, so I can't see the graph. So that's why
Yeah.
That's why I was asking. So Lewis River Road between ramps. So we don't have the actual off-ramp data, or do we do? Or
I don't think it is included in this. Yeah. No.
what
now
do
in
people complain about the most? What would?
That's the
Really?
state of Washington's problem. That's not our problem.
Well, at what point do we stop our
It's-
analysis?
that's
right?
that's the issue when people say we don't want Woodland to grow anymore at all. Period. That's the issue. That's the number one issue. So if we don't want to think about it at all, that's what.
Well, what I look at when I see that, we're looking at the Lewis River Road one, is it only goes from, in 20 years, we're going from 1,009 to 1,130, and that's like a 10% change. That seems great. We're going from an F to a slightly worse F. So I see no problem with that personally. That's why they're never gonna elect me mayor. Yeah, I think this is great. I think this discussion is great, and I'm happy to keep going with it. But I do want to be cognizant of actual sort of goals we might have for the meeting and directing you and such. So how are we doing on that?
So really, that's up to you, because I know I was ready to go till 10 or 10:30 last week, and you guys were like, "Okay, my brain is fried. Let's continue. Let's cut it short, and we'll look at what you gave us." So we could do that either way. We could go.
Okay.
We could dive into the goals and policies, which you haven't seen, or you could take a look at them and get me feedback and talk about it at the next meeting.
I would like to do that at some point tonight, whether or not at least in a cursory fashion. Whether or not we do that right now is.
And then the other item on the agenda is, what do you want to talk about and have me prepare for the next discussion?
I want to talk about Brian and his opinions about minimum parking. That's what I want to talk about.
You read that.
Sure did. Sure did.
Okay, and I
Took you off
unfortunately,
my friends list now.
I knew it.
and I unfortunately did not get time to download his comments, and so last
I
time.
mean, that's fine. They'll, for future discussion, they're there, and they were good. That was good stuff, Brian. Thanks for doing that.
And
know,
then-
Till, I know you wanna go through this. The first, my opinion, it's just my opinion. My first look at these things, I'd rather do at home, make a couple
Okay.
comments and then submit it, and then we can hash it out later. Instead of spending the time here reading and rereading it, what does that really say? No, I think it says this, I think it says this. I just think it's a more effective use of our time.
That makes sense, yeah.
Just my preference.
I did spend some time with it before the meeting, so I have a couple thoughts that I'm
Well,
gonna try to infect you all
please.
with and influence you, but, yeah, that
I'm
generally
fine
that makes
with
sense to me.
hearing your thoughts, I just don't have any yet on it.
Okay. I don't know if you have any kind of like big picture overarching.
I don't. I was just going to say, so under the grant, the deliverables are due in June, and so at your next or on your next agenda will essentially be the open discussion, the item, open discussion like we've been having the last couple meetings. But as a deliverable, we need to prepare a complete draft of the comprehensive plan that will be presented to you and the council. And we have until December to adopt it. So whether or not you maybe want to do 1 or 2 meetings a month, or whether you want to take a month or 2 to go through it and then meet again at a future date, you can dictate that either now or at the next meeting. But my responsibility is to provide you with a complete draft on your next agenda, and then that agenda will be delivered to satisfy our grant requirement, because the grant requires us to produce a draft, not a final or not an adopted, just a draft, a complete draft of the document, so that we've shown that we've done the work of updating our comprehensive plan, and you can tweak it until it gets adopted. Whether you are ready to take it to the council in August or December, that'll be up to you once you have it kind of cover to cover.
I just remembered something I wanted to share with you, Tel, about minimum parking. The state, are you aware of this, Travis? It's my understanding the state is passing limitations on the amount of parking we can mandatorily require. I think it's, again, I have a hazy understanding. My understanding is it's expected to be signed. It's not codified yet, but that will be handed down from the state, which will further your position on minimum parking. I don't know if you've already looked into that or not.
I saw a headline about it, but I didn't really investigate much further than that.
So me arguing with you may not even matter. It may just be state law.
I have noticed when a lot of those sorts of things, a lot of those kind of planning and zoning and minimums and maximums and things tend to have carve-outs for small communities. So I wouldn't be surprised if it passes and doesn't apply to us.
The draft or the preliminary version I saw had cities and counties.
Yeah.
I don't know that, I didn't read it deep enough to see if there was a
I'm all for it.
threshold for population, but it had cities and counties.
I did not see one.
Oh, really?
I had initially been told communities under 25 it would not apply to, but when I read it, it says everybody. And so,
All right.
like, our code requires 2 parking spaces for a single-family lot. You can imagine what people are going to be saying to me when looking at applicants who are proposing half a parking spot on a
Right.
lot, which is the standard that would be applied. So.
One of the
Sounds
ones I
great.
think I read was that if it's a dwelling unit less than 1,200 square feet, then no parking was required. And that
Perfection.
commercial uses couldn't require more than 1 space per 1,000 square feet. I mean,
Yeah.
they're drastically limiting the parking that jurisdictions can require.
It seems like that seems kind of feckless to me, but
It sounds like
it's a
you've been
start.
writing some letters.
It's a
Tel.
start. We'll see. They
You
get
can
real
get
about it.
a
Get
bunch
serious.
of bikes in that bike rack,
That's true.
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons I ask about the bike lanes and stuff, because you see more and more, and you're going to see more and more e-bikes. I came to the little open house yesterday, and we had this discussion, and it's possible that you could own a car, an electric car that was self-driving, and it could go park itself someplace else. you know.
Well, Dave, if you're looking, I know you're busy, but if you're looking for another business to start, I'll,
Get in on,
e-bikes in Woodland with you.
yeah.
Planners have been talking about that for a long time. The idea that a doctor's office would have no parking lot. It sends a car to pick up the patient, brings them to the door when the exam room is empty, and there's no waiting room.
That
There's
sounds
no-
like
there's
that's
no
how they get
parking
you.
lot.
Get back to me in, the year
Yeah.
2080 on that one.
2035.
I'm willing to put money on it. I'll wager against that, Travis, if you're willing. Okay. What were we talking about?
Goals and policies.
I got confused. Goals and policies. Thank you, Shane. Losing my mind. Okay.
Let me go get a copy of that. I didn't get any. Oh. Circulation going here. Thank you.
One thing I was curious about, I think you mentioned was, I don't remember definitely what you called it, but demand management or something about, I didn't notice anything specific about that.
Yeah, that section is identified in here, but now that you put me on the spot, I can't remember if I learned anything or read anything on it. So, not necessarily the same thing, but there is a section identified in here.
Well, okay. It looks like that is that's really just public transit is what they're calling demand management.
So why are there words highlighted in yellow? Is that,
Oh, that's the consultant just wanting staff and the planning commission to pay attention to something that might be a policy statement or an opinion that we may or may not. Of course, now that I'm looking for it, I can't find one. Like at the very end, it's specifically a note to staff that staff needs to talk about this and decide what they want to do. But it is at various places throughout, like that case.
yeah.
Be completed after discussion with us.
What was your question about T5, Travis? Transit and transportation demand management? What was the question on that?
I was just curious, I was curious about, we hadn't talked about that as demand management. I was just curious because I think, some of, honestly, you had a slide on there about was about expensive solutions. Maybe we can dive into that a little bit.
Oh, so that was my allusion to the fact that we have so many restrictions. The railroad, I-5, and then the river hemming us in on one side, and then the topography north of us. Any kind of solution to get from 503 to Green Mountain, massive expensive problem. Ideally, we would have another way to get to Green Mountain Road without having to go past the cemetery or over Scott Hill, but a county connection would be awesome. Or getting into Cowlitz or into Clark County without having to go over CC Street, expensive bridge. Trying to get past I-5 with the third connection, expensive overpass. Trying to get over the railroads without going under or getting an extra exit to I-5. Those are all extremely expensive solutions. And investing in demand management or better management of our transportation demands would be a much better use of funds.
So, and that's kind of where I was going with that. I think I don't want to speak for anyone else. So this is just my impression. But my impression is that the solutions to these things that people think of and that are obvious, and really in some cases the only ones that they consider acceptable even, are the ones that you're talking about, the very expensive things. And that to me is, at the very least, kind of a failure of imagination, because there are a lot of solutions that don't involve anything more than just kind of doing things, changing behaviors a little bit, or the cost of some thermoset paint, if you really want to get wild and crazy, at least to start, and then beyond that you can build some concrete curbs and things, and that'll get you a long ways too. So yeah, and I don't know how to. That doesn't seem to really get any. It hardly gets a mention in here, I guess. And I don't know if that's. Nothing else really does either, though. It doesn't say. This doesn't really talk about solutions to potential transportation issues, and maybe that's by design. Because it doesn't mention my preferred solutions, but it also doesn't mention like doubling the size of all the roundabouts or all the highways either. So, maybe that's just not what the section's about.
And I think that might be where your creative suggestions for the goals and policies, that might be where the traction is, right?
Yeah.
Because describing that as part of our comprehensive plan chapter may not be the best use of your time and energy. The goals and policy.
Can I ask, where do the goals and policies originate?
So, for the rest of the comprehensive plan, it is word for word out of our 2015,
Right.
with slight tweaks that may or may not reflect your current opinions. The consultant looked at it and said, well, this is really the same as that one. And Brian's like, no, that's not the same. Don't combine those. That's the kind of input that the consultant sees versus the local knowledge makes a lot of difference. On the transportation side, I haven't pulled out the old transportation chapter versus the ones that are submitted, but I suspect that because they rewrote this, they probably applied their best professional judgment based on what the regulations say and how much has changed since then. And since this isn't the standard consultant copy and paste chapter, this one is really tailored for us. It's probably a little more tailored for you guys to weigh in on your opinion as to whether or not it's correct or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, somebody is out there is telling us what our goals and policies should be.
Well, and it's really the consultant who's done all of our modeling, the majority of it in the last 10 years. You're absolutely right. What they see we need versus what you actually think the community wants, that's where you're going to get more bang for your buck if you pay attention to that over the next week or month.
Yeah, I think in some cases.
I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just saying it's.
There was a paragraph there that talked about plotting out connectivity for pedestrian and bicycle. Did they have a map with that? Did they have a?
Yes, so there are figures that talk about our existing infrastructure and the connections. So that is in there.
And has it got a map?
Yeah. You want to see that real quick?
I'd love to, yeah.
Yep. So for example, here's the bicycle transportation system map, figure 11.
So, okay, stop. That's good. So it just identifies streets that we already have. So it doesn't identify any, if we were able to connect a path between A and B, we would have a safer router. And it doesn't identify any alternatives that we don't already have, just maybe they're not that wide.
And I think that's part of what it does. So this one might be a little more informative because This is the pedestrian and trail system, and you can see that there's a lot more red on there, but you can also tell where the existing sidewalks are and where the needed trails are. So the black is the sidewalks, the blue is the gaps.
Where do we have trails?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any trails. Oh, I see. I
Oh,
guess I see
like
a couple.
Horseshoe Lake, long
Oh, the
Horseshoe
park.
Lake.
We have the park.
Yep, and then along here. So. And this
So
is
we don't really have any trails that are quote unquote connectivity for kids that are walking to school or.
not at this point, no.
'Cause, I mean, that's a answer to some of your peak hours right there. Sort of, I don't want to deviate too much, but so looking at this sidewalk gaps map,
I'm sorry, my eyes are so bad I can't tell you what particularly
well,
Um,
there's,
is.
this is a little bit of a self-serving question, but also gets to something that I think is important. When when the city put a sidewalk on one side of my street a couple years ago, this street's like, I think it's 50 feet wide.
On one side of what street?
Hoffman.
Oh,
And, the street's way too wide. It's just so much wider than it needs to be. But when we put a sidewalk in, took it out of people's front yards instead of out of the street, which is just inane. It's just stupid. And because they did that, it's not, I can't imagine it as ADA compliant because it goes out, there were parts where they couldn't complete it. So it goes out into the street. And I don't know how to stop anything like that from happening in the future, but that's just
yeah.
dumb.
Well, and I wrestle with GMA for all of the good and all of the dumb things it does. And that's a perfect example of how complete streets make no sense.
Okay, this could have been done fine. If they had just put that sidewalk in the existing street, everything would have been fine, and that's nothing about complete streets.
And some of the most charming neighborhoods are the ones that don't have curbs, let
and
alone
that's fine too.
sidewalks.
This one kind of needed because the road's so big, people drive at 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So, if I don't want to hijack your conversation, but I had an idea in the past because I did 300 feet of street improvements, including sidewalk from nowhere to nowhere.
On a county road.
$1,000 a foot, right? I would have been a lot happier to put a portion of that money into a fund that put sidewalks someplace we needed them. Because you can easily look at that piece of sidewalk and go, one piece of it is never ever going to have a sidewalk unless the city buys it. And the other piece, I don't think USNR will ever expand enough to have to put sidewalks in over there. So here we are. If I could have done some kind of offset, and that would have bought a lot of sidewalk in town.
Somewhere else, yep.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we had adopted the complete street ordinance, which means that we cannot pick and choose where we do complete streets. Because if we want to be in line for state funding for grants, we have to have a complete street ordinance, which means to accommodate you in something that makes sense would disqualify us from state funding for complete streets.
Why couldn't you
points.
include that in a complete streets ordinance, though?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously though, why couldn't you tailor your complete streets ordinance?
So
to
that's a
say-
good question. I don't know enough about that, and that was done by Public Works. And
I mean, because I know the people that push that legislation, they are interested in results. They're not interested in just like imposing this on jurisdictions. So if I don't think the city would have any trouble making the argument that
I I really feel the city does pick and choose. Because, you know, USNR's done inspections since I built that sidewalk. They've expanded a couple, 3 times, and they haven't been required to fix the street there. They have employees that use Robinson Road on a regular basis to avoid Sherman Way, and they haven't had to upgrade the street at all. So I think there is some picking and choosing going on there.
And in
I know one time, our previous public works director gave me an issue about something, and I said, let's go stand on the sidewalk in front of the new RV place and talk about it. Because there's no sidewalk in front of the new RV place.
Yep.
You know, and I kind of made my point right there.
Yes.
But
No, you do. Yep. And we still smack our forehead about that.
so
And technically, the only consolation we have is they will still have to build it at some point. We just need to have that nexus and that conversation. And Brian will know what I'm talking about here, and that is we constantly wrestle with the nexus and proportionality issues of, like, USNR. The majority of their traffic is up front. If they're doing an addition or remodeling an office, the proportionality of making them do the Robinson Road frontage improvements, we can't justify that some cases, and in some cases, it's just the planner rolling my eyes and saying, yeah, okay, you're gonna do this addition, but.
You can't use any cumulative impacts. You can only you have to make your decision on requiring frontage improvements based on what they're proposing here, even though they've chipped away at it
yeah, well,
seven times to get here. You can't use the
Years back-
cumulative effect.
years back we maybe that was just for SEPA, but we lowered the threshold
Yeah.
so that people wouldn't pave 1,000 square feet at a time without planning for their drainage, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, and like USNR is a great example, and that is, I know that they've got acres of grass out there, and when they develop that, they're not gonna wanna put additional traffic out onto Sherman, they're gonna wanna go to Robinson, at which point I will jump on that with glee and require the rest of that frontage
but
improvement.
if they do it one small building at a time,
Yeah.
it's never gonna happen.
And they will if they're smart.
And then, well, if it doesn't take much code reading to figure that one out, you know, or they go into the office and ask about it, they do a pre-app, and you tell them, well, if you go over this many square feet, you're gonna have to do improvements. So then they just say, okay, we'll do one building this year and one next.
Yeah, well, and that's true, but ultimately, Sherman is gonna have so much traffic on it, they are going to say, let's do this second frontage, because it's just gonna be so much less.
They
Of a
have a
pain?
road there now. They already have a second frontage. They have a solar-powered gate that they open up and drive out onto Robinson
Oh.
and avoid Sherman,
Oh, I didn't know that.
and have been. So,
I
but
just, go on. I was gonna change the subject. so-
go ahead,
so
let's change the subject.
I noticed on the bike routes map, sort of delightfully, if you'll scroll down to the bike routes map and draw your attention to Scott Avenue.
Down,
No, yeah, go up a little bit. East Scott Avenue
East Scott.
to
Oh,
West
yeah.
Scott Avenue. Yes, please. Let's do that. Let's put a bike route under the highway, I guess. I don't know what that's.
No,
they're planning
you
there.
just, there's an opening in the fence there, Tell.
Oh, okay, all right. This is
Once
this
every-
is a high adrenaline sort of thing we're talking about.
Not when they're stopped for
Yeah.
traffic.
Sure. Okay. All right. I don't know. do we-
Gleefully, let's get that fixed, right?
Yeah. Well, there's, so there is a, so north of Walmart, there's at least under the southbound leg
Yeah,
of
there's
I-5, there's a little wildlife crossing tunnel.
Yeah,
I think so.
it's still there, but it's little.
I don't know why we don't do more of those. I I mean, it's tough to get under the railroad, but
I don't know what that, if that's just to get equipment in there to maintain the drainage.
I'm not sure.
I know there's like a fiber optic cable that's laying on the ground that goes underneath there. There was for years.
Really?
I don't know if it was Dale Boone or my dad thought it was just like to keep wildlife off the highway.
And that might have been from the initial, because that might have been part of the initial Highway 99, Old Pacific Highway before it was I-5. I don't know. We used to go under there and go catch crawdads in Burrs Creek
Yeah.
and go underneath there. But
Did you ever find one under the northbound side?
the last time when we went, the beavers had dammed it up. It looked like rice paddies across there. They had several long dams, and I just said, well, if there's beavers here, there's no crawdads. So
This does bring me to one of the thoughts I have. This is as long as we're talking about bikes, sort of. So goals and policies. We won't get into this too much yet, but pedestrian and bicycle, goal T4. Develop facilities to provide safe pedestrian and bicycle travel to promote alternative transportation modes and support recreational activity. They talk a little bit about, so policy 4.4 does mention connections to regional and major local destinations, but it seems to have stalled since maybe 2018, but there was a kind of regional multi-use path
Six Rivers?
plan, Six Rivers thing.
I think they called it the Six River Trail.
Yeah, which I don't know, maybe that dream is dead, but maybe it's not, and mentioning sort of regional multi-use
So
paths
it
or something.
is on the COG regional plan,
Okay.
and it was one of the reasons cited for building the Civic Center and why there were restrooms accessible from the outside.
Yeah, cool.
Because we are the southern terminus of that
Yeah.
at the Park and Ride. So it theoretically is a trailhead design.
Yeah, well, okay, they should move that terminus to the park, but yeah, potentially, that seems like, again, it's probably years down the road, but that seems like it potentially could have an outsized impact for us.
does
if
that
that
mean
ever-
bike lanes will be required on Green Mountain Road?
Well, this is what I was getting at, because I was hoping there was a wildlife crossing,
Well,
and we could put a bike path
who
through
was
there.
Who was that county commissioner?
Yeah, it was, what was his name?
I went to
Who was into this? Who was spearheading this? Is that who you're thinking of? Karnofsky?
Karnofsky. Yes, he asked me, you know that area really well. Is there any way to get around Green Mountain Road?
Because that's gonna kill it. Nobody's gonna do that.
That's and there's not really any way to get around Green Mountain Road. He was like, even if we have to go through some private land or something, but that's just bad there. They would have to, actually get a piece of the shoulder of the freeway for a mile, and then they could be back on
Yeah.
Cloverdale or whatever that is over there.
Or I've also heard that they were exploring in between the I-5 lanes, potentially.
Yeah, I don't think the railroad's going to have anything to do with that.
Yeah, so they are desperately exploring a lot of
Yeah.
crazy ideas.
Oh, I'm glad they're still thinking about it. It's still being planned for. I think, yeah. I mean, if you could, yeah.
When we went to that planning symposium in St. Louis back in 17, there was some presentations on some examples where, like old rails to trails deals and stuff, where that really, really did help the economy of some Midwest towns and stuff. I think it would be great.
I think there's a huge demand for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think for Woodland especially, being at the end of it, that could have, people really kind of underestimate the impact, just sort of the economic impact of people on bikes, because they're tired and hungry and thirsty at the end of it.
Yes,
And they will
yes.
spend their money.
Yes.
And they're not going to go very far. They're going to walk to whatever's close.
Especially considering the fact that we have a dike around the entire bottoms that is almost a natural day trip for even people who aren't going the 6 rivers, but
Yeah, for sure.
right?
That's not an especially pleasant ride, in my experience.
Not
But,
not right now, but
Yeah, sure.
right?
It can get real windy depending on which direction you're going. But yeah, so there are other priorities, but yeah.
Do we
a
have
ton
enough
of-
goals in there for you, Chell? I mean,
I think there. I didn't really think about additional goals. I was just kind of looking at the existing ones. And for goal 1, it talks about. I think level of service is obviously. That I think this is obvious. Maybe it's not obvious that this is true, but I believe it's true. The level of service is a pretty flawed sort of engineering metric to base these decisions on. But it's what we've got, and I'm not going to change the industry here tonight. None of us are, unfortunately. But
It's flawed to everyone except for engineers.
I got a license, man, and
Even some engineers apparently.
some engineers. A lot of engineers love it because they don't have to think. They can just look it up in a table of contents,
Yep.
and they don't have to. Yeah, they can just
Run the calculations and they get an answer. Everybody's gonna love it.
Engineers that care about outcomes do realize it's an issue. But setting that aside, I do feel like wherever level of service is mentioned, it should have some, not necessarily caveats, but like bigger picture stuff. Like safety is more important than level of service, and I don't care how inconvenient that makes anything. It just is, and I think that's kind of a first principle of human values. And I don't know exactly how to acknowledge that, but I think that's something that can get lost pretty easily, and that does carry through to design sometimes. I mean, less these days, especially where there are other authorities kind of paying attention to these things, but I think that's kind of important. And then again, mentioning just evacuation. I didn't see that really in here anywhere. Woodland, quite honestly, we're in a great spot for. It's just a great spot, right? We got like rivers all around us, and mountains, and trees, and farmland, and a lovely lake and park, and it's awesome. But that comes with, some
Until there's an earthquake
restrictions.
and then nobody
Exactly,
knows what
right?
to do.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, fortunately, for the most part, we haven't really had to reckon with that yet. But that's not going to last forever. And I think transportation section isn't the only place that we might potentially deal with that, but I think it is one pretty important one.
I think it's a good one because, I always look at all of these as findings for when somebody is floating a project or a annexation or whatever the case, and Ensel Road ends almost at Green Mountain Road. There's that private road, Hillsdale Road or whatever, that you could walk from the one road to the other and be on Ensel. But that's a county piece of road there and stuff. And if we needed findings in the future, like for connectivity like that, it would help to have some findings. So
Well,
keep going north, Travis.
Well,
Is that the park?
That's the park, and
That's the park
that was
road,
the
yeah.
original road that has been roughed in. But yeah, I mean, that's,
But if you go
half
a little
of
farther
what you're
north, see there's that
addressing, yeah.
Hillsdale Drive,
yep,
and then zoom in right there.
these two.
Yeah, you get really close.
Yep.
Right there between Bozarth Heights, which is up the end of Insel, right? And
Yep.
yeah, so below that is where it floods, and they were talking about digging up Lewis River Road to drain that neighborhood in '96, and
Did they really?
yeah, right in there. So that would be a way around that if, for instance, the seawall is up or something of that nature. There is a way to get around that. I guess Scott Hill's a way to get around that too, but if that was foobarred for any reason, those are the things we need to consider, and we need to be able to have findings for them.
Yeah.
If we're gonna use them to have somebody compromise on something someplace,
Yeah.
Yes, it's gated up there.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's important, right? Because especially in the situation of just hypothetically, for the sake of discussion, in the case of dam failure, it's like the issue is going to be to get as many people to high ground as quickly as possible, and for a big chunk of woodland, the fastest way to get to high ground is Insel Road.
Yep.
And that's going to be different. For example, if wildfire is the disaster that we're dealing with, then we probably just want to get people out of town. We want to get people on the highway.
Well, you need to get them on the highway heading south, not north. Because if there's a dam failure, the modeling has shown that I-5 north of us will be flooded as well. So you would only be able to basically just get around the corner and out of sight. And it's not that significantly high before you get to the low ground by Kalama, which is going to be flooded as well. So there's a short perched area, and anybody who's getting on the highway thinking it's salvation, it's not going to work. You literally got to be able to get over these bridges into the high ground by La Center and Ridgefield, and even that may not be.
Or up Green Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
up-
Green Mountain's fine. Like, honestly, for any of these floods, like, you need 50 feet up a hill, so it's not like.
Well, and this is a great example of the old-time Woodlanders understand, yeah, you don't head for I-5, you go for Green Mountain. But anybody who hasn't been here for 10 or 15 years is going to head to I-5 because they panic, and that's what they know to do.
This is not an insoluble problem, right? All it takes is a couple signs. Like, there are anywhere on the coast,
Yeah.
they've got tsunami route signs,
Yep.
right? And you see them, and it makes perfect sense, and there's
Yep.
no explanation required. I'm trying to remember where it was, but I did recently I saw a very similar sign in far from any coastline that was about floods. Oh, it was I inspect dams for a living. It was while I was doing my job. So it was like in an area that was potential inundation for like kind of sudden releases of water. And it said, go this way if you hear this siren, go this way. Like, this stuff is not expensive or complicated.
No.
Yeah. And the county just recently updated their flood management hazard plan, and I believe that was adopted in 2024. So it is on my
Cowlitz?
radar that we need to have some internal conversation. New police chief, new public works director. This is on our radar of conversations we need to have.
Sure, but
Let's
I think there's room
put
for
something
it.
in there to have some findings. Just.
I think there's room for it in
Yeah.
in the comp plan. Obviously, it's not going to be that specific about, like.
So, I have a question, if we can change the topic.
Sure.
the county has designated Washington ATV routes, and the city has allowed permitted ATVs to drive in the city. Is that,
And a golf cart zone.
and the golf cart zone, is that anything we need to address in this transportation plan? Is everything, because like the golf cart zone isn't everywhere, but you don't need a golf cart now, you get an ATV, and can you go everywhere?
So I was thinking about that, and specifically when I was preparing the slides, I was very careful to point out that the motorized or human-powered active travel plan doesn't include stuff like that. And the ATV ordinance considers the fact that they are only allowed to go under I-5. They are not allowed to go on Pacific or Atlantic, and so there are limitations where they can go. That's written into the ordinance, and really any goal or policy wouldn't necessarily allow us to deviate that, because that's DOT. And the golf cart zone is very limited because the person who wanted it
Yeah.
stay stuck in a particular area and they're now gone. So I've never seen a golf cart in the 8 years I've been here. And so
I really hope
is it
I
more
hope
work
someone
to
starts
get rid of that, or
No, we
on
should.
the case that
It's
we
a great
wanna do it?
ordinance.
Yeah,
Just because no
expand
one's
it.
using it, maybe somebody will. I hope somebody will someday. I hope I do someday. But like, it's a great ordinance.
And a few years ago, we had actually had someone who was looking at the property on Mitchell behind the Safeway parking lot where the blue steel buildings are. They proposed a senior center and wanted to
remember that.
expand the golf cart area so that the seniors could go to Safeway and McDonald's and the rest of the downtown with the golf carts. And unfortunately, the council didn't like
They
the
sure didn't like
proposal.
that. I don't know why.
So,
That was a great proposal.
yeah, so that does come up every decade or so.
'Cause the
It was.
police-
Oh, I remember why they didn't like it. It's because somebody influential didn't like it.
Well, they switched the golf carts to allowing gas golf carts, and
Yeah,
so the
that's-
snowbirders can have their gas golf carts, but
That was a mistake, I think. But can the ATVs go up 503?
What's that?
Can the ATVs go up 503 out of town?
till it leaves the 35, they're limited at 35 mile an hour.
Okay, all right. So they can't get very far.
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody knew the answer to that, because I was totally deer in the headlight. I don't remember that conversation.
I see a few zipping up Green Mountain, going from the bar back.
Yeah.
One thing, kind of trivial, but they should fix this. Clearly copy and pasting some of these sections because the city of Shelton is mentioned twice.
The city of Shelton.
Shelton.
Oh, I'll have to do that search.
Which, I'm in favor of, not reinventing the wheel and not rewriting paragraphs entirely. You don't have to. You
Yes.
just got to be careful. So let's not talk about highways in the Shelton plan.
Let's call Shelton and find out how they like it.
That's a good idea,
Yes.
actually. Yeah. Although, yeah.
I was clearly dazzled by the city-specific tables, and so.
Yeah,
But-
no, mostly they're good. I think this is, I think there's room for improvement, but by and large, I haven't dug too deep yet, but I think it's at the very least a pretty good start. So yeah, I think that's all the notes I had at least on that. Check some things off. So, any other talk about the transportation chapter before we get time to dig into it on our own? These are things I think about a lot, so I could keep you guys here all night, but I need to. Yeah, I'm sure.
I
you
would
will.
love to, would love to be able to read it. I'm gonna have to get the Office suite loaded
I
into
wonder-
this thing.
What do you have? Can you get OpenOffice? OpenOffice will open it, and that's free.
No, it wants a password, and actually, my wife just bought a new laptop, and she says it got like, you can put 5 devices on it, so it's gonna happen. But it's just a bear when they're not PDFs.
Well, no, the program OpenOffice. It's a different program. It's an open source one.
I don't know.
Instead of using Word, you can use OpenOffice.
I don't guess I have that in here either.
Well, you can
So-
get it though. It's because it's free. And it's, I don't know. It's maybe not quite the same, but
I don't.
lets you do that stuff without paying Microsoft, which I consider good.
I think we just paid Microsoft on that new laptop, so I'll get
All right.
it in there. But
Water under the bridge.
yes,
Okay, so I want to check in with the folks in the room with us, make sure we don't have any citizen communication for items on the agenda or not on the agenda.
Well, just as you were speaking.
Well, hold on. I'm gonna want you to. We got to make this official.
No.
I want you to come up and. I want this to be on the record.
We wanna just pretend like we're real.
This is the most important part of these meetings, Donna.
Yeah, so I'm just listening, and I just heard this comment several times about behavioral modification versus spending resources. I think that's something definitely worth considering. When I think of Woodland and our intersections, and I believe that's what you were talking about, it's more than a 1 hour congestion. It's yeah, and it can be any time of the day. I live here, and sometimes I'm surprised, like, what's going on? How come it is so crowded now? And then in the summertime, we have all the traffic going up to the lakes and the mountains. So we can have a congestion problem any time of the day. And so I think we need to consider some more than 1 hour. And I've been at that intersection several times when I've watched emergency vehicles trying to get through. And so even at that most congested time, if you want to say that 1 hour, which is actually more than an hour, public safety becomes a real issue. So I think that spending resources is going to be necessary to really address what we have going on here in Woodland. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Yeah, and that was, I kind of focused on a different part of my point, but part of it was that, part of my objection to that peak hour is that it doesn't tell us anything about that, right? So if that's the measure we're looking at, just peak hour, we don't have numbers that say like, it's not talking about our peak 3 hours, for example, right? Which I think is more, I think the peak hour is, potentially an important piece of information, but so is, the total hours in a day that traffic is, unacceptable or unsafe in some way. And that is not captured in any way by that one metric that we've got, which is this, both the peak, I guess it's 2 then, but the peak hour traffic and the level of service. So that's kind of, and that's, so I don't disagree with you at all. I think that's really important, and it's kind of, even furthers what I was talking about, where we see these numbers and it looks like that's reality, and it is in some ways, but that's not all of the reality there. So, yeah, and while I do think, changing habits and sort of cultural changes can be part of the solution, and like in some cases not all the problems, but in some cases it might be the whole solution, and maybe it's not, but it's a lot cheaper to try that than it is to
At least consider.
yeah. Excellent, thank you. Okay, well, you guys ready to move on, folks? Yeah. Okay, great. So moving on, closing down the transportation discussion, and then just general rest of the discussion. Where do we go from here, kind of?
Not really. That's kind of what we've been doing
Okay.
the last little while.
Yeah, I saw, Brian, the email you sent. Hasn't really come up in any way, but just a reminder that we shouldn't reply to Brian's email if we're using that, just so we don't get into public meeting issues.
I thought by copying the board when I sent my comments to Travis that I was facilitating
I think yours is
the
fine.
transfer.
I think yours is
Okay,
fine. I
okay.
just think like.
That's why I included everybody, not just to
No.
pester you with unwanted emails. but
No, that's fine.
to make
But
sure that I'm-
but we shouldn't make a chain of it, is what I'm saying.
When-
So,
Okay.
When was that? 'Cause
So is this in our city email? Because I don't.
Yeah, that's the only one I have for you guys.
Well, I don't know how to access my city email.
I know, I don't either.
Oh.
It was-
So I sent
I
it
call,
from my.
I call Travis
sent it
once
from
every
my
2
work
months
one
to
your
fix it.
email.
Yeah.
Travis sends them to both, my personal email and my city email, but I didn't, I guess I didn't open it up late enough. I think I opened my city email yesterday.
Yeah,
Or I was
I
looking-
sent it
yeah.
this morning, I think.
Okay.
Real last minute.
Okay, yeah, I don't think this is gonna be an issue, I just,
I think it's
Talking
there's,
about the open public.
yeah, open public
Right.
meetings rules, we
Yeah.
can't get into an email chain. It's
Yeah.
fine for you to send that, and I think anybody to send a one-off email, we just can't be like replying to them.
To each other.
Yeah, to each
Gotcha.
other, yeah.
even
On a
the-
one-to-one basis, it's fine.
but there's judicial and then there's quasi-judicial, right? This isn't, it's somebody's project, so I always kind of use that as
Yes.
what
But-
makes it quasi-judicial.
Well, really, you're talking about a quorum. If you have an email chain that includes
A
3 of you
quorum.
exchanging emails, that is a quorum.
Yeah.
So generally, you should all send it to me, and then I can forward it to you. As long as you reply to me, I can forward your response, because then the public can ask for all of my emails to any of you, and it's all public record through my email. But as soon as you start talking to each other directly, it becomes a quasi-judicial meeting without the public notice and
Even when it's
without-
on the city email?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there hasn't been any notice.
And that's part of the reason, like, if there's something that I need you to know or see, I will send it to both of your emails. So that way, if anybody wants to know the communications, my email is the hub of all spokes of that communication. And they don't need to ask you what's on your personal email account, because it's all on my email account.
I have a question.
Okay.
How many visitors did you get?
Yesterday, 3,
Okay,
including you and Miss Donna.
yeah, okay.
And then the other one was Dawn, who is the lady who writes and does a lot of the writing and publishing for
The newsletter thingy, yeah.
Watchdog.
the Watchdog. Yes,
Yeah,
and so
okay.
she and I spent probably an hour and 15 minutes
Yeah.
discussing various issues and that. So yes, that might be one leveraged conversation that ends up reaching a lot of people in the community that didn't show up.
Let's hope. Yeah.
I think you need to start in your public notices. Throw a little stinger in there about how you're gonna do something horrible. You're planning to just like do something horrible to the city.
We're gonna increase potholes.
I will
Right.
be discussing tax raises.
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, more taxes. Yeah,
Yes.
to fund this.
Increase in
you know,
potholes.
GMA, yeah, this GMA thing. We're gonna
That will be my last meeting with the city. Yes.
we're gonna reduce lanes and we're gonna increase taxes just to get people in the room, and then because that's all. That's the only reliable way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I would like to share is I got to go into the office with Travis, and we massaged the inventory. We looked at the inventory. We looked at the data, and he'd let me, the places I knew, we looked them up to see if they were in there, and that's, and ended up the structure with $50,000 or less value, and everything didn't actually end up being that bad of a bar to hold that search to. The county tax record stuff is really not that easy to search because there's so many little pieces that make, you know, you look and you think, oh, there's a bare 1 acre piece someplace, but then when you look at it, it's actually 4 or 5 different tax lots. And I've seen that a lot. You know, I've looked at the county the assessor map a lot, and I've seen that a lot. So that made that make a lot more sense. And I was the one that was skeptical about that data, and I kind of wanted to share that I'm a lot more confident in that data now. And that data says that we are, you know, kind of painted into a corner on available real estate, period. And we have to just, you know, plan around that and have a good statement that we are going to work with the county on expanding the UGB in an organized fashion. I really don't see, my feelings are, I don't want to see the county says we need to add this many homes, so here's this many acres and make it residential and go. I would rather see us say, okay, in 20 years, we would add acreage in steps. You know, we would increase the urban growth boundary in steps, but not, you know, trends change, things change. Let's, you know, bring it in a little at a time if we can. I don't think it's the county's goal to just dump a whole bunch of stuff on us anyway. So, you know, to look at that and say, well, in 5 years we're going to need this much more real estate, and in 10 years we're going to need this much more real estate, and the fact of the matter is in 8 years we're going to be doing this again. So, you know, I think we need to have some sort of goal in our land use section that kind of outlines it that way, where we acknowledge the fact that we've needed expansion of the UGB and we can't just do that ourselves. So.
Okay. Well, thank you both for spending the time on that. I will, you know, use that opportunity, because I try not to miss an opportunity to plug sort of, you know, the alternative to expansion that I like. You know, expansion is an option, and so is incremental development is, you know, the term I'm familiar with, and that's the idea that you know, in an area that is developed to some density, it makes a lot of sense to allow, you know, development, increase that density up to, like, in an incremental fashion. So you're not going from like a single family home to a high rise. You're going from a single family home to, you know, maybe a duplex or a fourplex or something like that. Then, you know, so there are those kind of other options for accommodating that growth in ways that aren't like disruptive to the fabric of the city, but still do kind of accomplish some of those things that we really need to. And I, you know, like with a free-for-all, even in that isn't going to work. So, you know, it has to be thoughtfully developed. But there are ways to address it without expanding this boundary that we aren't in charge of entirely, at least.
So I have had a couple conversations with council members and the mayor, and I was on the last agenda. Unfortunately, not everybody was there, so they asked me to come to next Monday's meeting to do the presentation about the discussion of land capacity and housing. And part of the conversation that came up with the council members that I had talked to one-on-one was the idea that we do have a significant number of houses that are in development. and the possibility of bringing back up the work we did just after COVID and during COVID and right after COVID of increasing densities, simplifying our accessory dwelling units, allowing for duplexes on corner lots without having to get a conditional use permit, minimum density. That was already laid out in our CWs. We also had that conversation when we talked about our housing needs assessment. And so a lot of that groundwork had been done, and the council, one of the council members was like, that's a really good point, because if we have 3 or 4 years of existing construction in the hopper, and we increase those densities so we start to see infill of underdeveloped lots, we may not need to talk about expansion for 7 or 8 years, and at which point it would be a much easier conversation without having to annex all. Like we had talked about in 2019, we talked about, you know, everything down to the Lewis River on the east side of the train tracks, potentially up to 2,800 units. That may be the right number that we come up with, but the council doesn't have to rush to annex it all. We could go 7 or 8 years without even having to talk about expanding the boundary.
It's very obvious that the RCWs that are, you know, we're not compliant with now, and then the new legislation that's coming out is all in favor of that type of infill and trying to avoid the sprawl, you know, and that's where, you know, we've talked about looking at our code and making sure we can do things in our code, and if you get some council members that are in favor of updating that code, it doesn't all have to be scary. ADUs don't have to be scary. You know, there's ways to do it, and I think we really need to focus on facilitating the lower income housing portion. That the 2,500 units between Woodland and the Lewis River east of the railroad tracks is not going to be lower income.
Well,
you know,
and what qualifies as, you know, lower income or affordable housing these days is kind of absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Even
the word starter
ADUs
home doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's
Even ADUs don't fit that criteria anymore.
yeah, especially, you know, especially compared to our, you know, Woodland's existing median income. Like there isn't property available anywhere in the city that qualifies for that. Probably not even rentals.
I just want to add one thing to that. I do agree with infill development, right? Of course I agree with that. I do think that expansion of the urban growth boundary is important, though, because the longer it's not governed by city codes, the more chance it has to develop into 2.5 acre, $1.6 million homes that will never be redeveloped. That land will be lost to development if that happens. I'm not saying it's a land grab and a rush, but I'm just saying that when they develop those into 2.5 acre lots, we're not going to get those redeveloped. They won't be. And they won't connect to water and sewer because they won't have to.
Until their water system fails.
Until their water, their sewer system fails.
not till the flood.
These are brand new, so you know they're going to last for a while.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But
I mean, there's got to be issues with.
And I would like to point
septic
out that the
system.
county has started, they've had 2 or 3 meetings of their comprehensive plan of adoption. So if you have the opportunity to get involved with those, right now there's one other gentleman from Woodland there and some other citizens from various parts of the county, but Woodland is not nearly as represented as it needs
is
to
the
be.
one guy from Woodland a developer?
I'm not sure what he does for a living, but I think it might be something to do with business or development, business owner.
This is the county council?
Cowlitz County Comprehensive Plan Update.
Are they, they're planning, the county's planning commission?
Not yet. This is more the outreach, stakeholders
Oh,
meetings.
so staff.
Yep.
Okay. Because I think Erica Rodman's still on the, her name's still on that planning commission up there.
Maybe what I'll do is as I start getting those, I will route them to you, CC you, just in case you have the opportunity to go up there and involve. I struggle going up there because I think there's so much need to be said for Woodland, but at the same time, not being a member of the community, I don't want to steer the county's planning process, which kind of puts a leash on me, both as a professional and as representing Woodland. So it would be nice to have somebody to ride in the car up there and we can talk philosophy the whole way. And then they can unload on the county, and then we can debrief on the way back.
But you'd want to
You
sit
get that.
apart.
You hear
Is
that?
what you're saying. You want to
Yeah.
sit in different sections.
Yeah.
Don't make eye contact. Okay. Yeah, if that'd be great if you want to, yeah, keep us posted on that. Okay. So yeah, I saw there's been some comments sent to Travis on the other chapters, which is great. Keep doing that as you get time. What do you want from us tonight?
If
for
you
next
can,
time?
if you can get me any feedback as you go through, especially that matrix. You see Brian's adding stuff in there, and I'm adding stuff as I go, and
Okay.
more of that we can get.
Is the format he did where it's just kind of a list, was that works?
He sends me emails, and yeah, I fill it in as I go.
Cool. Thanks for doing that, Brad. Appreciate it.
So I ask you how to get to this stuff at each of these meetings, and then I wait till the last minute because I'm procrastinating, and then by the time I try to dig it up, I forget how to do it again. So I've gone through what you had printed out for us.
It's always in the agenda links,
It's in the agenda link.
Oh,
so far anyway.
Oh yes, that's right.
So I've gone through everything that I have, I think. So the only thing that you're asking for comments are the transportation stuff you just handed us
For right now.
for right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
As long as
stuff
I'm
that's on the
clear what
website.
I'm supposed to be looking at.
But yes, so he's pointing out that each one of these agenda items has a cover sheet with a link to the page. And so every agenda
if
item will get you
scroll
here.
down and click on files,
Yeah, files.
Yep.
and
There's a lot of them.
Okay.
And I put transportation at the top because it's the newest. Normally the goals and policy
That's the one I just
spreadsheet is,
reviewed and sent
yep.
you, right? Okay.
and this date, so this is April 25th, 25. The next version will probably be tomorrow at 5/16/25. So if you, even if you're not looking at the most recent version, you just might be missing Brian's latest update or Sharon's latest update. It's this, I'm not changing the substance of the goals and policy column. I'm just updating the planning commission comments. And then it's all organized by chapter after that.
So this one doesn't have comments from SCJ?
Not-
I'm just
not
adding
yet.
some.
Nope.
Right, okay.
That
I just
essentially-
wanna make sure I'm clear on
That
what-
essentially is the draft from SCJ. 100% SCJ draft proposal for adoption.
Fresh squeezed.
And I guess one thing that I will do is I will take their proposed transportation goals and policies and add them to that matrix. Right now, there's no transportation on that Excel spreadsheet, but I will put it there.
Okay.
And if you prefer to work in paper, come see me. I can print those out anytime.
Okay. All right. work for us tonight. It is 9:30, so I think it's all right for us to start wrapping up.
I move that we wrap up.
Second.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded to wrap up. I do have a little bit of discussion about that first. My term expires June 5th. So I like doing this, so I plan on reapplying, but that is, we don't know the outcome of that, so maybe I'll see you next month. Maybe I won't. And if that's the case, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate, all of you committing your time, commissioners, staff, public coming to these meetings. Yeah, it's a privilege that I think a responsibility that I don't take lightly, and I hope I get to keep not taking it lightly, but if I don't, thanks. And keep
Me
doing what you
too.
do. Okay. Moving on. Anyone opposed to the motion? Great job. Thanks, everyone. Okay.
I appreciate your tenacity on being here every time.
Oh, I didn't get that.
Dedication is admirable.
I shouldn't have stopped recording. Should have got that on the record.